It is moving to the north at 14, and that movement is very key. We're going to be watching that today. Another key thing we'll be watching is the pressure, 977. Sometimes you see that drop first, and then the wind speeds actually pick up to catch up to that. So we're going to keep a close watch on the pressure. The hurricane hunters are going in. They're giving us that information about the pressure. They're giving us the information about what the peak wind speed is, and more information about what the storm itself, the structure of it is. You can see that eye wall right here. And you can see again on at least the eastern side where we're getting a lot of that rainfall. Doesn't mean that there's nothing on the western side here, but in terms of, where this storm is going to be heavily loaded with the impacts, it's the eastern side. And that's what's going to be brushing us here right along the west coast here. Starting today, these bands are not too far away from the Tampa and St. Pete area, even Fort Myers, even the Keys. We're likely there, the dry Tortugas and out towards Key West, to get lashed by some of those outer bands. So let's track this storm. And this cone is a track forecast. Where would the center of circulation go, knowing that the impacts will be well outside of the cone? You saw how big Idalia is. So we're going to be watching for this track up to the north and making more of a turn to the north and east. The time frame for a landfall is sometime tomorrow. Well, we're watching. Speed is everything, right? And we'll be watching at some point tomorrow. Is it early morning? Is it midday here? That's going to be the details that we need to continue to fine tune. Now, in terms of the impacts, though, today, look at those showers here moving in all throughout Florida, all throughout the peninsula, the Florida peninsula. We've got even Orlando getting into some of those showers. That'll be rotating in, and then things really start to go downhill as we get into the later hours today, overnight. This is 4 a.m. tomorrow. This is a model forecast, but just to give you a sense of what we're looking at here in terms of some of the biggest impacts. And it's not just about the rain, and it's not just about what's happening in the core. It's also about what's happening in these outer bands as well. Let's go right now to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And you just heard from Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, here briefing on what's happening here in terms of the state's preparations for Hurricane Idalia, urging folks that if you have to evacuate, you may not need to go hundreds of miles, just 10 or 20 miles might be enough to get you out of that surge zone. So taking that into consideration, and that right now, this is it. This morning, maybe early afternoon, this is the time to rush those preparations here when it comes to being ready for Hurricane Idalia. Let's go out to Reynolds Wolf. He is live for us in Ford Island Beach. And Reynolds, we're talking about impacts that are going to be along the west coast of Florida into the Panhandle. You don't necessarily have to get a landfall to have impacts, especially from the water.
Yes.
Hurricane Idalia, the advisory, this one from 7 o'clock this morning Central Time, has it located about 135 miles away from the dry Tortugas. And you're just first up. That's where we're going to see some of the impacts. We're feeling those outer bands right now.
Yeah, you were talking about some of the conditions at Key West. Right now, we're seeing 20 to 30 mile per hour sustained winds with gusts even higher than that in some of these outer bands. That, as you mentioned, the kind of weather we're going to see across southwest Florida during the most of the afternoon hours today.
It's a hurricane, 80 miles per hour. The radar allowing us to see that eye wall is almost complete. And when you get that complete eye wall, that allows the system to get into strengthening mode. And that's what we're worried about for today. Let's talk about what's happening with these outer bands, though, because this is the kind of weather you'll be dealing with when you're trying to rush your preparations today. We're showing you, look on the screen, we're showing you Key West. Look at that water kind of lapping up over there. So it's a combination of the storm and some of the surge getting pushed up.
Yeah, and the weather even over southwest Florida for much of the late morning and afternoon hours.
Yeah, look at this, Greg.
There's Key West. How about that? So you get some waves lapping up.
Yeah.
Over some of the seawall there. Yeah. Well, even in southwest Florida, we're going to see the weather conditions okay today to make those last minute preparations.
Yeah. Okay. So, this is the kind of the outer reaches of what we're dealing with right now with Idalia. As we go through today, we are expecting strengthening. You talked about yesterday that danger zone that is going to be moving through, Greg.
Right in here, the water content, the heat content is very high. If there's going to be rapid intensification, it's going to happen today, roughly in this part of the Gulf of Mexico, and then closing in on the Big Bend area of Florida, likely tomorrow morning.
Yeah. And then, speed picking up a little bit, but because of that, it won't have a lot of time to spin down as it's moving over land. So it could be some strong winds inland as well.
That's for sure. And power outages will extend well inland. As we know, landfalling tropical cyclones are not just coastal phenomena. They carry their impacts well inland. And in this case, even with the hurricane, let's say, well over 100 miles to the west of Tampa, we're going to get an onshore wind. What's the time here? So early tomorrow morning, we're getting a southeasterly wind, southeast southwesterly wind, bringing in some water rises to the Tampa area and those wind-facing shorelines.
Yeah, and even as you make landfall, that wind direction doesn't change. So we're still dealing with that. And by the way, that 4 a.m.-ish was about high tide, and then we'll get through a second high tide cycle as well, getting into the afternoon. So a lot of concerns out there for water, and of course the rain that will come from the hurricane itself.
Hurricane warnings and hurricane tropical storm warnings as well over much of the region, and these extend well outside of the cone. Yet another important point to know that the impacts can extend for hundreds of miles far from the center.
Yeah, and inland too. Hurricane warnings all the way up into South Georgia. Look at Valdosta under that hurricane warning. The other issue will be tornadoes. We see that sometimes in those outer bands. We'll have to keep an eye on that starting today, continuing to tonight. Let's go out to Paul Goodloe. He's in Clearwater Beach and get an update there. Paul, everyone's sort of rushing to get ready for the storm, right?
Yeah, many are. Others are just kind of waiting for it now.
Continuing through tomorrow afternoon and evening. Again, watch the timing of this. This is helpful, right? We see, Wednesday night, the storm itself is on the move through South Georgia. Thursday morning, moving through South Carolina. Thursday afternoon, North Carolina. So along the way and out ahead of it, even before it gets there, there will be impacts both with rain and with wind, and also with that onshore flow that we really got to watch, as Greg talked about here on that coastline. First, just looking at the wind perspective. That's what these warnings are for. The hurricane warning, the tropical storm warning that extends well inland. We're expecting winds that could gust easily to tropical storm force as we see the system likely hold together as a hurricane well inland. And then because it's moving fast here, this takes some time for all that momentum to kind of spin down. So we'll see some pretty, I think, feisty conditions with it as it moves through parts of South Georgia and then into South Carolina. I want to pick up the timing and talk about that. So we're watching some showers start to build in, those outer bands really reaching us later today and tonight. And then tomorrow is when everything comes in. We see the landfall. We see the big swath of rain, the big shield of rain come in with this hurricane. That's setting up over South Georgia, maybe making it up to Augusta, Macon. Got to keep an eye on maybe I-20-ish. And then some of the heaviest of rain moving over towards Charleston. But again, Savannah, Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, we are all going to be getting this onshore flow, which is key here in terms of pushing water in. So just bringing those coastal flooding concerns, as well as maybe some urban flooding, like in Charleston, where if the water's not able to drain out as easily when that rain is coming down, that can cause some flooding issues in town. Wilmington, you've got the rain still coming down. This is Wednesday into early Thursday morning. And so the time frame for flash flooding, this is a look at where we could see it starting tomorrow morning, going through Thursday. And there's a large zone here from northern Florida into Georgia, into South Carolina, into Wilmington, and into North Carolina as well, again, with that risk of heavy rainfall. We're looking at an area that could see anywhere from maybe 5 to 8 inches of rain in pockets here. That's a lot of rainfall, and that will cause that risk of flash flooding. Reynolds, thank you for that. And you're right on the water. The water is such a concern for us always when it comes to hurricanes. And I want to look at the storm surge aspect of that and show you more of what it will be. And we're looking at an area that could easily get 6 to 9 feet there. Tampa points northward in the Tampa Bay, 4 to 7. Just south of there, 3 to 5 feet. We are very concerned about this onshore push of wind and water that's going to happen because of a hurricane. And when you get a major hurricane, it's a combination of both the strength of the winds as well as the size of the storm that we'll be watching to create that storm surge that will be pushing water onshore and giving us that risk of flooding. So let's get a closer look at 6 to 9 feet of storm surge. So we're going to show you 6 feet. So let's zoom right into this. We're going to take you down right along Shore Boulevard and look what would happen if we get 6 feet of water. We've got water filling the street. The cars, you can see they're floating in the water. The restaurants that we're looking at, Neptune Grill, the Tiki Bar and Grill right there, water would be completely inside of that. Again, up to the rooftop of the Tiki Bar. Look at that right here. This is with 6 feet of storm surge. And then we can continue showing you what would happen as we zoom back along. Again, Shore Boulevard completely inundated. The beach parking where people have their cars parked for a day at the beach. Hopefully that is cleared out because that would be inundated with a 6-foot storm surge. Taking you down Beach Boulevard right here. You see how the water goes inland. That's a common question is how far would it go? We're talking 31st, maybe even to 30th back there, getting into water because of a water rise. And think about where this water is coming from as well. We're talking about it coming in off of the Boca Ciega Bay. It's not like this is coming directly in from the Gulf of Mexico. It's these little inland sort of waterways here that feed in, and even a storm that is offshore can create inundation just like this and devastating and life-threatening storm surge. We're going to continue to bring you updates as we get them, showing you visualizations of what it could look like, and our channel to bring you the information that will keep your family safe during the storm.
Yeah, we'll be with you around the clock, both on air and on the TWC streaming app during the duration of the event.
A lot has happened this morning. But now, in case you missed it, we have a hurricane, so Idalia strengthened, and it's getting into that zone where it has the opportunity to rapidly strengthen.
Yes, some of the atmospheric conditions are more favorable for that right now than they were this time yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's moving over the warmest and deepest waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The oceanic component is helping out as well. So we'll be watching that very carefully today.
All right, so let me run through some of the latest and what we know right now. We'll talk details about what we are looking at, what the potential is here for Idalia. It is a hurricane, winds at 80 miles per hour, and we're watching it move to the north at 14. It's a big difference from yesterday. If you recall, this time yesterday, it was barely moving, then started to pick up a little speed. Now it's picked up a little bit more, getting into that zone right here in the Gulf of Mexico that is very warm, and that warm water extends deep here beneath the surface, and also the conditions aloft in the atmosphere will be more favorable for strengthening. It's a Cat 1 right now. We expect that that is going to change and the storm will get stronger. Now, as we look at some of the outer bands and the reaches of this, there's two things I want to point out on here. One is that eye wall is trying to form, and this is a radar, the Key West radar kind of hitting this out here, so you're able to see some of it. We can't see everything that's happening on the western side, just too far away from the radar, but you see that eye wall. When there's an eye wall, now it has an opportunity to strengthen more. And the second thing I want to show you is just look how far reaching these outer bands are. So you're going to be getting into some of the impactful weather starting today. We've been seeing some of that already lashing up through the Key West area. There's been some special marine warnings. Nobody should be taking a boat out here across the zone today in southwest Florida. The winds right now about 10 to 15 miles per hour, the gusts a little more, and that's been the case here at Key West. We've been in this outer band and getting into wind gusts gusting over tropical storm force. We got 41 mile per hour wind gusts here at last check, sustained winds up over 20. We're also going to be watching as we see the projected track move it forward. Some of those outer bands are reaching farther up the coast. Look how far offshore it is at this point, and we are still getting the outer reaches. So the size of the storm is going to make an impact in terms of the rain reaching. The core of the storm, as it moves up here right towards a landfall, will have the strongest of the winds, but there's so many other impacts we're concerned about. The rain that will be heavy at times, the surge, the water that will be coming up because of that onshore flow, as well as the rainfall again and that risk of flooding. So here we go tomorrow morning. This is about 4 a.m. Again, this is one model run. Know that there's going to be some differences in this forecast. And we heard earlier from Governor Ron DeSantis, and he talked about being ready for changes both to the track and to the timing, and you have to be in the case of a landfalling hurricane. But we're thinking sometime tomorrow morning, late morning-ish, watching it move very quickly. And so now moving through northern Florida, South Georgia, and then by Wednesday night already up into South Carolina. The reason that we've got these hurricane warnings in so far inland is because it will be moving fast and likely holding on to that hurricane status even as it moves up into South Georgia. Let's go down along the coast. I'm going to take you down here into Citrus County to the Crystal River area, and that's where we find our Reynolds Wolf. And Reynolds, you've been talking about the water, but also about some of the other conditions you're going to expect there. I'm gentle right now, but that is going to change. So I'm standing in the virtual view of Tampa in Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park, right there on the Hillsborough River, which leads down to the Hillsborough Bay. So with Idalia, we could see up to 7 feet of storm surge in this area, and that would put me in this whole park underwater. And so I want to talk about the storm surge risks that we have here along the coast, the west coast of Florida. The storm surge watch is up. North of that, the storm surge warning, which does include Sarasota, Tampa, and the whole Tampa Bay area, Newport Richey, and Hudson Beach up towards Cedar Key under that storm surge warning. Now, the most significant storm surge will be near and just to the right of where we have the landfall. And that is an area where we're likely to get 8 to 12 feet plus of storm surge. Absolutely devastating and life-threatening. South of that, 6 to 9 feet. Still life-threatening. 4 to 7 feet just south of that. And again, that would put significant areas underwater, could get up into the first floor of many structures, especially those that are most prone to flooding on waterways. So we want to talk about what drives this. It's a combination of the wind strength, and stronger storms increase the force pushing on the water, but also the fact that a big storm will increase that as well. 15 mile per hour difference in wind can raise the surge by several feet, which is why we're very concerned about this rapid intensity intensification and the fact that the storm could get a lot stronger today. In fact, is forecast to do so compared to where it is right now. So let's look at the wind and the wind direction. That's everything here. It's all about the wind pushing the water towards the coast and pushing it inland and not allowing some of those inland waterways to drain either once we get some of that heavy rain that comes in. So it's multifaceted when it comes to storm surge. You see these strong winds, you see that direction of wind. Again, the Tampa Bay area and north of there, you get this onshore flow starting overnight tonight, continuing through the day on Wednesday, even after landfall. The winds have not changed direction. They've slackened off a little bit, but they haven't changed direction. And we're just certainly concerned about this. In a place like Cedar Key in particular, 6 feet of storm surge is your record set back with Hurricane Hermine in 2016. And we have the potential to break that with this. Let's go back to Paul Goodloe. He is live in Clearwater Beach, a place where, Paul, you've already been seeing the surf start to come up here. In terms of impacts tomorrow and then perhaps into Thursday as well. So let's show you the latest with Hurricane Idalia. It is a Category 1, winds at 80 miles per hour. This is at the last advisory. The hurricane hunters have been flying through it. It's moving pretty fast, Greg.
Yes, it is. And I think it's still strengthening. We have to watch out very carefully over the next 12 to 18 hours how it moves over the Gulf of Mexico, because this is the danger zone. We've all thought long and hard about this, that would be the place. If it's going to strengthen quickly, it will be there. I'm
wondering, just in this appearance on satellite, if it appears like it's moving faster than it is because of the strengthening of the storm surrounding it.
That's hard to know. That's a good question.
To know, right.
And that's hard to know. But what we do see is that most of the bad weather is on the east side of the circulation. There's some westerly wind aloft impacting it. So residents along the west coast of Florida, be careful, because the worst weather is on the east side of this system. Yeah, already getting some gusty conditions out there, 20, 25 miles per hour. Watching the weather, though, for now, still sunny along the coast all the way up here to Tampa and St. Pete and Clearwater Beach. Those outer bands have been getting us out towards the Florida Keys and Key West. You've had a pretty stormy day. It's still going, and you're also getting some of that onshore splash, too, with the surge. All right, let's go over to Paul Goodloe. He is live in Clearwater Beach with the latest on how they're preparing there, Paul.
Yeah, Jenny mentioned the clouds. We're seeing some blue sky north.
Idalia is set to bring flooding, rainfall flooding, and dangerous winds to places like Tallahassee. So joining us right now is Tallahassee Mayor John Daly. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about the preparations. What are you doing right now in your city?
Well, thanks for having me on. We've been really busy.
Hurricane Irma and for Hurricane Michael, neither of which have made landfall directly, in that corridor, but they both had big wind impact. Beautiful tree canopy in Tallahassee. Is that one of your biggest concerns?
Absolutely. We are a Tree City USA, and we are known for our live oaks. But as
no, in that track here, it's just too close for comfort for sure for Tallahassee. Let's talk about some of the lessons maybe the city has learned from previous storms. You certainly have been through a lot down there on the Gulf Coast.
Yes, ma'am. So,
Daly from Tallahassee, thank you so much for joining us here, and certainly good luck with everything today and getting ready for the storm coming in tonight and tomorrow. I want to talk more about the impacts too, beyond just along the coast and just inland. Again, Tallahassee's not a coastal city; it's inland, and you're going to be watching for potential impacts there. And you notice that Tallahassee is not in the cone. You don't have to be in the cone to get impacts. We expect it to be a little more widespread in terms of both the onshore push of water when it comes to the surge and the wind field, which sometimes spreads out a little bit too as it moves overland. So that's something we have to be concerned about. Hurricane warnings extend well inland into South Georgia. Tropical storm warnings beyond that. And then we've got the tropical storm watch up for cities like Savannah and Charleston. And there, I think it's a combination of both the rain and the onshore flow, which could lead to some flash flooding concerns. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I mean, we start to see some of those showers, the outer bands really reaching the area as we get into the later hours today and overnight tonight. But the core of the rain comes up through tomorrow. And a lot of this rain may fall in a very fast pace. Talking about rainfall rates of more than an inch or 2 or even 3 per hour. That gets you into trouble with flash flooding concerns here. And that's one problem we have. This is tomorrow afternoon. You see that for Georgia and South Carolina. But at the same time this is all happening, we're going to be watching for the winds circulating around, coming onshore in places like Charleston. Charleston, you worry me when it comes to flooding because you're just very prone to it. The fact that we've got a high tide and a higher tide at that, considering it's a full moon, that we'll have to worry about with that onshore flow, plus the rainfall coming in here. Definitely have some flooding concerns there. Wilmington, another city that I'm keeping a close watch on. We've got heavy rain coming in. Rainfall that could cause flooding that's being outlooked starting tomorrow morning, continuing through Thursday morning from northern Florida through Georgia, South Carolina, into North Carolina. And there's even the chance of some flooding all the way up towards Raleigh and the Triangle area. We've got some big rain coming. We've got anywhere from 3 to 5, that's the yellow color, to 5 to 8 inches of rainfall. And it's not just actually localized. It's a pretty big corridor of that amount of rain is possible, running all the way out to the to the Outer Banks with those higher amounts here. So certainly concerned about flooding with the rainfall forecast like this. We'll stay on top of the reason why you evacuate here. It's the primary reason why people lose their lives in hurricanes. So we want to focus in on the water. Reynolds, we're going to take folks into the storm surge forecast and help you visualize what it could look like. We still need to improve on it, but we can give you a realistic view of what storm surge will do. So we took you down Beach Boulevard and made a turn here on Shore Boulevard, and we can show you how the water at 6 feet inundation would come up. Look at it, floating vehicles. Cars are going to float in less than that, but 6 feet would certainly float it. And you see it coming up here to all of the restaurants and the locations right on Shore Boulevard. We're talking about Neptune Grill back here. We're talking about the Tiki Hut and Bar and Grill right there. Water coming in and water pushing up to these homes, which are back here. Back behind Neptune Grill, we've got that Tuesday market, which normally takes place today. Of course, it's closed today, but the water would get all the way up there. And you can see actually how that water would go very far, pushing all the way in, talking about 31st Avenue and maybe even beyond to 30th. Look how far inland the water gets as well. This is why you evacuate. All right, Greg, so we're talking about an area, too, that's not going to get the landfall, but the outer reaches of the surge will potentially the information that will keep your family safe during the storm.
Yeah, and we'll be with you around the clock, both on air and on the TWC streaming app during the duration of the event.
New advisory in for Hurricane Idalia. A couple of important points. The winds are up a little bit, both in the present time and in the forecast.
Yes, it feels like it's now starting to strengthen and maybe now beginning that period of rapid intensification that we expected to happen today. It is in a part of the Gulf of Mexico, both oceanically and atmospherically, that is ripe for this kind of strengthening. We have to monitor it very carefully. The official intensity forecast now at landfall is a bit higher than it was at the previous advisory. Now at 125 miles per hour.
Yes, you so aptly called the zone the danger zone yesterday in the Gulf of Mexico. It's moving through because everything, unfortunately, coming together for increased intensity. So I want to talk about where we are right now and give you that latest advisory. Again, new advisory just in, hot off the presses here, coming in from the National Hurricane Center. Winds have now increased to 85 miles per hour. The pressure is down to 976. This is all data coming from hurricane hunters, which are flying through the storm, and it's going to be consistent throughout the entire life of the storm over the Gulf. They're going to have multiple planes in here to give us data about what's happening. The location is now 120 miles to the west of the Dry Tortugas, and we're seeing some of those outer bands. That one round has already been through Key West. Even without it, we're still very gusty out there, so even the outer reaches here are going to be impactful. Of course, the core of the strongest winds will be contained right there around that eye wall. And the hurricane hunters have observed that we now have a completely closed eye wall. That's very important. That observation is very important because when you have a completely closed eye wall, it means that the storm is able to go through strengthening and, in fact, able to go through rapid strengthening, intensification, once it moves and continues to move through this danger zone, as Dr. Greg Postel has been calling it. Very warm water, upper level conditions, which are more favorable for strengthening. Here's the outer reaches and those outer bands. Mentioned Key West here. Again, we're not even in a storm right now, and we are getting winds gusting to nearly 40 miles per hour. We've been gusting a little higher than that, where this is going to swing on in and pivot in there. This now is going to pivot closer to the coast here, Fort Myers and Naples, that outer band. Again, this is just the outer reaches here of the hurricane. And speaking of the hurricane and the outer reaches, I'm going to show you the forecasted cone and the path, but you just saw how big the storm was and how the outer reaches outside of the cone are already impacting us on land. So know that there's going to be impacts even outside of this cone. This is the new change I want to show you, that winds now forecast to be 125 miles miles per hour as it approaches land. So an even greater increase than we saw before, accelerating through the day on Wednesday into Wednesday night through South Georgia and northern Florida, then into South Carolina. So let's take the model and just to give you a sense of what's going to happen today. This is this evening. Some of those bands lifting up through the Florida peninsula. We're going to be watching the rain at times. Tampa, very heavy. At this point, this is now overnight tonight. The onshore flow is pushing in all along this west coast of Florida, watching the core of the system with the worst of the winds and the worst of the surge associated with that. And we'll see that move up north here somewhere, probably in this Big Bend area. Let's go down the coast a little bit to Citrus County, and it'll take you into Reynolds Wolf, who is in the Crystal River area. Reynolds, I think it's important that you are standing on a waterway. And you're not just standing on the beach either, because it's not just about the water coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, the worst of it, but it's going to be impactful even outside of where the worst of it's going to be. So I'm standing in the virtual view of Tampa. I'm in the Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park, and with Idalia, this area could see up to 7 feet of storm surge, putting me and this whole park underwater. So this is right on the Hillsborough River, which leads down to the Hillsborough Bay, and so that push of water could come right up into this area, especially with that south and southwest wind that we're expecting. Again, all about the track of the storm. Going off to our west is really a problematic track. So here we go with a look at the forecast. Storm surge warnings that are up, including Tampa and down towards Sarasota, St. Pete, Minnesota as well, all the way up around through Cedar Key and Fish Creek and Apalachicola as well. And then down to the south of that, a storm surge watch. Still monitoring conditions down there for that potential. Now, we've got a 8 to 12 foot surge and some of the worst surge that will happen up near the point of landfall. But then south of that, 5 to 9 feet, 4 to 7 feet. That includes the Tampa Bay area. That is a life-threatening surge. 7 feet is over my head. I certainly don't want to be caught out in that. And even the 3 to 5 feet south of there, you get up towards 5 feet, it starts to be very concerning what that's doing to roads and moving in and certainly isolating you if you're in that area. Now, storm surge increases the force that's pushing on the water, and even a small difference, like 15 miles per hour in the wind, can actually raise the storm surge by several feet. So think about that. We're talking about this rapid intensification, and sometimes that's hard to see what are the bounds on that. Could you get to we're at 125 in the forecast right now. Could it go up to 130? That's possible. And even that little bit of incremental increase will increase the storm surge. So here we watch the timing of it. Tomorrow morning, certainly some of the worst in terms of the wind. Continuing through the afternoon, though, because now even once you get a landfall, we're not going to see the wind change direction. So still monitoring conditions down here along Florida's west coast and the Big Bend area. And looking now at Old Port Tampa and some of your records to show you where we're standing. 3.55 is the record set in 1996. Most recently, it was back in 2018 in a December storm, and then Hermine in September. So, it could be significantly more than this here is one of our concerns. All right, let's go out to Paul Goodloe, who's live in Clearwater Beach here. Paul.